Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, regardless of where you are welcome to another talk in the Spiritist Talk series, which is promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation. We are here every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, the Eastern Time in the US. Today, we're very happy to have our host to host this talk by Vicente Pessoa. He's going to be talking about Dr. Bezerra De Menezes. Hello, Vicente. How are you?
Hello, Glaucio. It's nice to be here with you. I'm very happy to be here, and we hope we can have a nice talk and we can learn together about this great personality.
I'm sure we're gonna have a good time, and we're gonna learn so many important things about the life and the work of Dr. Bezerra. Vicente, if you allow me, I'd like to make a few announcements before we get started. We have a new podcast that is being brought to you by the United States Spiritist Federation. It's Psychology and Spirituality, A Bridge to a Better Life, and it's based on the works of Joanna de Angelis. And we have new episodes every Friday at 7 p.m., 7 in the evening, Eastern Time. So basically, it is again based on the works by Joanna de Angelis, and they provide a space for us to confront, correlate, and expand our spirituality concepts based on a psychological view. Um, Another interesting announcement as well, important announcements that the United States Spiritist Federation is hosting its 17th Spiritist Symposium. It's going to take place on September 30th of this year, 2023. And this time is going to be in Portland, Oregon. And the focus of the symposium will be spiritual path to mental balance. It's going to be a full day program, and all as always, we're going to have talks, panels, and Q&A sessions, and a youth panel as well. So save the date. And also, if you want to help the Spiritist Federation, there are ways for you to contribute materially. Um, and there is a QR code that is being shown on the screen right now. The Spiritist Federation is a non-profit organization, and it's dedicated to the dissemination of the Spiritism doctrine in the world. Not only your donations will not only help us to continue to offer these talks like this, and also podcasts like the psychology and by the works of Joanna de Angelis, but also translations of Spiritist books to English as well. So help if you can. Your help will be welcome. All right, so Vicente, so now back to you. Thanks so very much for being with us. And again, very interesting topic. And we're very eager to hear about you. So, but you're quite busy, so we appreciate your time. So you are an infectious disease physician. That's your specialty. And you're also the current vice president of the Spiritist Medical Association of Goiânia. Goiânia is a state in Brazil. So again, welcome, and thanks for taking time off your very busy schedule to be with us and talk about Dr. Bezerra de Menezes. Thank you. And without any further delay, please lead us through the conversation.
Thank you, Glaucio. I just realized we have the same last name, so maybe we are related, right? And we didn't know about that. Just something here, a bug. Okay, so I've been here before to talk about another great man in the past, which was Abraham Lincoln. And it was a great joy to talk about Lincoln because learning about his life is learning about many good things in life. So we are here again to talk about another great man. This one is a Brazilian man, and he was a doctor. And we have a close relationship with him in medicine, like we that are doctors and we are spiritists. We have a close relationship with him. And also, all the spiritist people in the world have a close contact with him because he's a great worker. Even before he passed away, when he was incarnated still, He had a great work, as we are going to see during this talk. And he is a very important person in the Spiritist movement, in the Spirit ideal. And I would like to begin my talk talking about a little bit the spirit of Ismael. Most people in the Spiritist movement don't know exactly who Ismael was. So according to the historic facts, Ismael was the bastard son of Abraham. And Abraham was a man that was sent by God to bring us the idea of the only God. On that time, people used to believe in many gods, but Abraham had this mission to bring the idea about the only God. And this idea is very important because this idea put us under the filiation of one only God. So it makes us brothers and sisters. It makes us siblings. So it brings with it the idea of fraternity, which is very important for Christ, for the message of the gospel to take place on earth. So Abraham has this mission, and he has this son with a slave, and not with his wife, Sarah. And this son is called Ismael. After that, Abraham and Sarah are able to have their own son, which they call Isaac. And Sarah, now she's not happy with the presence of Ismael in their home, because now she has her biological son, and she wants her biological son to be the heir of Abraham and not Ismael. So Abraham is forced to ask Ismael to live with his mother, which was a slave. But Ismael, he did not get angry with Abraham. On the contrary, Ismael let forgiveness grow in his heart, and then he realized he had a great mission too, which was to spread the idea of the only God along with his father Abraham, and then they work together. But why are we talking about Ismael? Because we have this wonderful book written by the spirit of Humberto de Campos, which was a writer in Brazil. And he wrote this book through Chico Xavier, and this book is called in Portuguese, Brasil, Coração do Mundo, Pátria do Evangelho, Brazil, Heart of the World, Land of the Gospel, Home of the Gospel. And in this book, we are going to watch a scene take place in the spiritual world where Ismael is the chosen by Jesus to help bring the new message of Christianism to America. And he was chosen because Jesus needed somebody with a great ability to forgive, somebody with a great ability to love. And Ismael was the chosen one because of his past history. He had proved already that he was able to forgive and to give a lot of love. And then Ismael, working with the Portuguese, trying to develop navigation with the school of navigators that Portugal had, was responsible to transfer to the New World the message of the gospel. So the old world, which is Europe, was already tired of the idea of Christianism, and they were taking another way. And then Jesus thought that it was time to bring the gospel to the New World, where the population was ready to accept it the way Jesus brought it to us. And then we have this situation on the spiritual world where we are going to find Jesus, Ismael, and a few spirits that were talking and organizing this mission. And in this book, we are going to read the following message. Before that time, when about to find the first kingdom in Brazil, which was led by Dom Pedro I. So before that time, when about to find the first kingdom, Ismael gathers in space his dedicated comrades in the struggle, and having organized the venerable assembly, where the great messenger of the Lord explains to everyone his inspired goals. So he was explaining to his friends, his comrades in the struggle, what the new mission was going to be. In the new truth must first arise, according to the imperatives of the natural law, in the cultural centers of the old world. It is the homeland of the gospel that we will give them life, applying them to the building of the triumphal moments of the Savior. So Ismael is explaining that he is going to bring the message of Christ to the new world, to America. Let me just organize something here because I'm not able to see the whole slide. So I'm going to open the slides here in my computer so I can read it. So there is this sentence, this conversation between Ismael and a friend. And Ismael is choosing this person, this spirit, to guide the way, to be the leader of the new mission. So, says Ismael, you will descend to the earthly struggles with the goal of focusing our energies on the country of Cruzeiro, directing them to the secret goal of our efforts. You will rally all the dispersed elements with the dedications of your spirit, so that we can create our core of spiritual activities within the lofty purposes of reform and regeneration. We don't need to enhance in your eyes the delicacy of this mission, but with full observance of the code of Jesus and with our spiritual assistance, you will pulverize all obstacles by dint of perseverance and humility, consolidating the beginnings of our work, which is that of Jesus in the heart of the homeland of his gospel. If the fight will be big, consider that it will not be less compensation from the Lord, who is the way, the truth, and life. So Ismael is talking to somebody and is letting him know that he has a big mission, a very important mission. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of humility. It's going to take a lot of perseverance. But the compensation from the Lord would be very great. So it sounds prophetic, and it is prophetic. And after a few years about that conversation, we are going to find on August 29, 1831, in a small town called Riacho do Sangue, in the state of Ceará, Brazil, Adolfo Bezerra de Menezes, being born as a great disciple of Ismael, who came to fulfill a high mission in Brazil. So here, we already can realize how important this man was. He was a man in a mission. He had a mission that not everyone could accomplish. It had to be somebody that had the trust from Ismael and the trust from the Christ, directly responding to Ismael and to the Christ. It sounds like Allan Kardec's mission. It sounds like Francisco de Assis' mission, because it's a great mission with a great importance. And we are going to see that he was born in a very poor place in Brazil. We all know that the northeast region in Brazil is the poorest region in Brazil. And in the country, on those states, far from the big cities, the situation is even harder. So he was born in this town, Riacho do Sangue. And it's very interesting because when he was already incarnated, he wrote a book. When he was still incarnated, he wrote a book called Evangelho do Futuro, Gospel of the Future, by a pseudonym where he calls himself Max. And this book is edited by FEB, Federação Espírita Brasileira, Brazilian Spiritist Federation, which is called Gospel of the Future, where he brings us a story about a young man called Raimundo and an American doctor called Dr. Capper. And Dr. Capper was a very good man, and Raimundo was a burglar in Riacho do Sangue. And he gets to know Dr. Capper, and that transforms his life. And Raimundo becomes a very good man as well. But as Dr. Bezerra, calling himself Max, brings us this story, he describes the cities in that area of the country. And he describes how people got education, health assistance in that area of the country. He describes the geography, the rivers, the animals, the plants that used to live there. And some of those characters represent the vision that he had when he was a child on that part of the country. So we get to know his childhood through his characters in the book. So we get to know that he learned Latin, the language, the dead language Latin, very well. He had good command of mathematics. He had a very good command of Portuguese, English, and he had a very good command of the gospel because he had a very strong education concerning Christianism and concerning the gospels. So his father was a farmer. His mother worked with his father in a farm, and he had a lot of siblings, many siblings. Some of them became lawyers, some of them became farmers as well. And that's where he grew up, under this very good influence of Christianism and learning how to behave as an explorer, how to love learning. So he had a great passion to learn about plants, which would help him a lot in the future as a doctor, as we are going to see an episode that happened to him during medical school concerning a very specific fruit that we have in Brazil, and how much he knew about botanics and plant properties and about science in general. So this is where he was born. He also wrote another book, which in Portuguese is called A Casa Mal Assombrada, which is the haunted house, right? When he was still incarnated. And in this book, he tells us a story about a young man from the northeast part of Brazil who travels to Rio de Janeiro in order to go to medical school. So he's telling us his story, the way he traveled to Rio de Janeiro, and all the adventures that he had, all the difficulties that he faced when he got in Rio. And he tells us through the main character of that book, representing himself, representing his views about life. So when he gets in Rio de Janeiro, even though his father had a good financial and economical condition in Riacho do Sangue, Ceará, he did not bring a lot of money with him. And I remember that in those days, we did not have bank transfer. So he did not have ways to get money from his parents. It was much difficult that time than it is nowadays, right? So he had to work in order to make a living. And before he got into medical school, he was living in an apartment and he did not have money to pay rent anymore. And he then tried to use his knowledge in mathematics to teach some students that were looking for private teachers to pay for lessons in order to make some money and to pay rent and to make a living. And one day he went to the library and he took a lot of mathematics books in order to remember some details, in order to teach students. And one day somebody knocked at the door. It was a young man looking for a math teacher. And that man learned that he knew math very well. And he hired his services as a math teacher. But the curious thing, the very interesting thing, is that that man never showed up. He paid 3 months in advance of his math classes and never showed up to take the lessons. So when we read that Ismael was telling him that the struggle would be very hard, but the compensation and the support from the spiritual world would be very present as well, we kind of understand that maybe that young man was not even incarnated. Maybe it was some phenomenon of materialization, but the fact is that the man gave him the money. So the money existed. Some people believe that that man was a spirit, but he gave Dr. Bezerra the money. So maybe it was just somebody inspired by good spirits to help him, because he was a man in a mission. He had to have a lot of good conditions to succeed. And maybe people from Ismael was inspiring that man to pay Dr. Bezerra in advance in order for him to get the chance to go to medical school and succeed in his mission about Christianism and about Spiritism. So that's a very interesting story. But we have a second interesting story about his arrival in Rio de Janeiro to take med school, to go to med school. He was going to University of Medicine in Rio de Janeiro in order to make his registration. And when he got there, he learned that he had missed the date. He was in the wrong date. So registration was closed and he could not register himself as a med student anymore. So he was very disappointed. But at the door of the medical school, of the building, he just met that beautiful girl that he describes as a girl with blue eyes and with blonde hair, very white skin. And this girl, which was around 9 years old, was with a slave, a lady that was taking care of her. And it was a slave because at that time we still had slaves in Brazil. And he thought that that girl was so pretty that he decided to talk to her. And when he was talking to her, he realized that that girl was the daughter of the director of the School of Medicine of Rio de Janeiro. And then that girl, when she looked at him, she automatically guided him to her father. And then he got the chance to talk to the director of the Faculty of Medicine of Rio de Janeiro and explain to him his situation. And that man, when that man put his eyes on his eyes, he realized that Dr. Bezerra had to have a chance to go to med school, and then he was able to make his registration as a student in the first year. So that's a very interesting story as well, and makes us think what kind of help he was having from the spiritual world, right? So many coincidences in his life, trying to make everything goes right in order for him to to be successful in his mission. So when he was in the first year of medical school, he was very bullied by the other students because he was from the northeast part of the country, because he had a different accent, because he had financial struggles. He was not a very rich person in Rio, even though his father was a very was had a good financial condition in northeast, and because he had to teach math, to teach Latin in order to make a living. And so he was bullied by his colleagues. And one day, and this story is brought to us by him, by Dr. Bezerra himself, in this book, A Casa Assombrada, which is the haunted house. He brings us this story. On that time, med school was very different from today. So they had botanic classes, and we don't have that nowadays. So science was different, medicine was different. They used to deal a lot with plants, and the scientific method was very different. So they had a global formation. So they had notions of astronomy, of botanics, of zoology, and we kind of don't have that nowadays. So it was more similar to the typical Renaissance men, people who had the love and passion to learn everything, all sciences. And so he had a very good botanic teacher, which was called Francisco Freire Alemão. And this teacher, he knew everything about all plants. And they had to do a paper about a plant. That was the assignment. They had to write a paper about a plant or a fruit or something, and write everything they knew about that plant. And the students didn't take that very seriously, and they usually wrote like 5 or 10 lines about a plant. And Dr. Bezerra De Menezes decided to write a paper about passion fruit. It's a very common fruit in Brazil. I'm not sure about in the United States. I'm sure there is passion fruit in the United States, but in Brazil it's very, very common, right? It's a tropical fruit, so that's why it's so common in Brazil. We call it maracujá, right? So Dr. Bezerra, with his knowledge about fruits that he got in his hometown in Riacho do Sangue, he wrote a very big essay about passion fruit, like a dozen of pages about passion fruit. And his teacher doubted him. He thought that he was copying from a book. And Dr. Bezerra told him he was not copying because he was faithful to truth. Everything he wrote there was written by his own hand. And he asked the teacher to ask him questions about what was written there, because if he had copied from somewhere or some book, he was not going to be able to answer the questions. But if he had that knowledge, he was going to be able to answer all the questions. And then the teacher became to asking many questions about the paper, about the essay, and he had all the answers because he knew all the answers. And after that episode, he got a lot of respect from his peers, from his colleagues, from his medical students, from the teachers, and he became the first student in his class. He had the best grades. He was very dedicated to medical school, and the bullying was over. People wanted to be his friend, and he was so kind with everybody, and he was able to keep those friendships forever. So time passed, and 1856, he graduated from medical school with the best grades in his class. In 1858, he got married with this lady called Maria Cândida de Lacerda, and she passed away 5 years later. She got tuberculosis, and even though he was a doctor and he was taking care of her, he was not able to avoid her passing, there was no specific medication for tuberculosis, and he was left with 2 children. And life was very hard then, because he was very depressed, he was very sad, he had to work, he had to take care of the children, and he lost faith. His Catholic faith, which was very strong, was lost at this moment, and he believed only in God and in the immortality of the soul. That those were the 2 only beliefs that he had at that time. He had lost faith in all Catholic dogmas after that. But soon, 2 years later, when his wife passed away, he married again, and he married again with his wife's sister, which was Cândida Augusta de Lacerda Machado, and with her he had other seven children. So he was father of 9, and then in 1860 he decided to get in politics. He became a politician. So he was a congressman in the state of Rio de Janeiro, and he was also a congressman in the nation, like a federal congressman in Rio de Janeiro. And he took that office from 1860 to 1885. He was like 25 years of his life dedicated to politics, and he was part of the Liberal Party. He had some specific beliefs in some theories about politics, but most important, he was in favor of science and progress, and he dedicated his politics life in order to create good ways for the poor to live. And it's interesting because he had already this concern about the poor and how to see people for free as a doctor. We are going to see some cases where he how can I say that in English? He saw patients for free, right? He treated them for free. He made a lot of efforts and sacrifices in order to save lives as a doctor and as a politician as well. And he was not, he didn't know Spiritism until that time. So it was his Christian feelings, his Christianity that was guiding him. And maybe our friends from spiritual world, as we already seen. So he had this very strong character of politics, and he was a very good and very fond of the poor and those who most needed. And that's true because he didn't make money, right? He was broke when he was a politician. He used all his money as a doctor to help other people. So one day we got to talk about his conversion to Spiritism, and it is a very, very impressive story as well. So as I mentioned before, when his first wife passed away, he lost faith in the Catholic Church, and he kept believing only in the existence of God and on immortality. And his contact with young medical students contributed a lot for his loss of faith, which is very common. It happened to me as well. During my medical graduation, medical formation, medical studies, we kind of lose faith somehow. We get too scientific and too materialistic, and we believe that everything can be explained by matter itself. And so it's very common during medical school. And I completely understand what he went through at that moment of his life. And the death of his first wife brought him this great pain and depression, and he lost interest in reading. He was a very hungry reader. He read everything that came to his reach, and he had lost his interest. But somehow somebody gave him an example in a volume of the Bible, a unity of the Bible that was very beautiful, made by leather and with a lot of figures and pictures. And he somehow got interested to read the Bible again. and he read the Bible from the first page to the last page at that moment of his life. And that feeling of Christianism grew in his heart again. So one day, one of his friends, which was called Carlos Joaquim Travassos, gave him a unit of the Spirit's book, and he was very afraid to read that book. He did not agree very much with the ideas of Spiritism as he believed. He did not, and he took the gift. He was trying to be kind and polite, and he took the gift. And one day he was going back home by train, and he lived 1 hour away from downtown Rio by train. And he was on the way home, and he had nothing to do on the train. And then he decided to read the book. And his thought was, I'm not going to go to hell if I read this book, right? I am a man of science. I like to read about all philosophies of life. I have an open mind. So it's not sacrifice to read this book. Let's see what this book brings. If this book brings something good to me, so let's begin to read this book. And so he began reading the book. And as he read the book, he realized that he already knew everything that was written in that book, and that he lived his life according to the ideas on that book. And he was already a Spiritist, and he didn't know about that. So on his words, he wrote, I read, but I couldn't find anything that was new to my spirit. And yet it was all new to me. It was the first time he was reading that book, actually. It seems that I was an unconscious Spiritist, or, as it is commonly said, Spiritist from birth. This is what I was, Spiritist. And in what I believed, the way I lived my life until I was a Spiritist formally. So it's very curious, because that happens with a lot of people as well. When people get to know the Spirit's book, it seems like it's an old meeting, an old friend that you are facing again through your history. And that's exactly what happened to him. So he began to read books from Spiritism to go deeper and deeper on that knowledge. But one day he was suffering for a dyspepsia. Is that how you say in English? I hope so. So he was suffering from those kind of symptoms from around like 3 years already, and he could not get better at all with medication that he knew. And then a friend of him, Dr. Maya de Lacerda, told him about a medium that was working in downtown Rio, and this medium was prescribing medication for people. And Dr. Maya de Lacerda went there and gave the medium the name Adolfo. Nobody knew his name, Adolfo. Everybody called him Dr. Bezerra De Menezes, because when he declared himself a Spiritist in a public speech that he made in front of many politicians in Rio, many doctors, many important people, and people were just shocked to realize that important man, that honorable man, was a Spiritist. And people called him Bezerra De Menezes from that day on. So the medium did not know that his name was Adolfo, and the medium made a prescription based on homeopathy for his signs and symptoms. And after a few weeks taking the medication, he was very fine, only with a light pain on his hip and a light weakness in his legs, as if he had walked a great distance. And he was convinced that medium knew exactly what was going on with him, and he could not know that without knowing him from distance. And then he was absolutely convinced that that was a true medication sent by the spirits. And he became the so-called doctor of the poor, because he opened his office with a friend, and they never had money at all, because they saw the patients for free. They did not have the courage to charge patients to treat them. So he was always in financial difficulties, trying to treat everybody for free. And he has strong words about that, how a doctor should behave with his diploma, right? And since I'm part of Spiritist Medical Association, we have some mantras from him, some very strong words from him, which are really difficult to follow, I should confess. But we try to do as close as possible. But one of them is the one I'm going to show you right now, to show how this man was a good man. He was also called the Brazilian Kardec, because he was so faithful to the strong roots and principles of Kardec's doctrine, Kardec's ideas in Spiritism, and he worked very hard to develop Spiritism in Brazil, as we should see soon, that he got his this new nickname, the Brazilian Kardec, the doctor of the poor. So, in his words, a doctor does not have the right. A doctor does not have the right to finish a meal, or to choose the time, or to ask if it is far or near, when an afflicted person knocks on his door. Those who do not come may have a visitor, because they have worked hard, or because they are tired, or because it is late at night, the road is bad, or the weather is bad, they are far away or on the hill. Which, above all, asks someone who doesn't have the money to pay a prescription for a car, or tells those who cry at the door to look for another one. This is not a doctor. This is a medicine dealer, a merchant of medicine, who works to collect capital and interest spent on graduation. This is a wretch who sends to another the angel of charity that came to pay him a visit and brought him the only source that could quench his spirit's thirst for wealth, the only one that will never get lost in the hustle and bustle of life. So this is how seriously he used to take medicine and the job of a physician. You have no right to finish a meal. It doesn't matter if the patient seeking help lives far, if it's late at night, if it's raining, if it's sunny. You have no right. You need to help people because they are suffering. And med school is supposed to relieve pain, to relieve suffering. So he took that very seriously, and he paid a very high price economically and financially because of that, as we are going to see. But this is something that we try to follow in Spiritist Medical Association, but we understand that it's not a very easy thing to do, right? Sometimes, first, because we are humans, we are not Bezerra De Menezes, we are not a spirit of that light, of that evolution. Sometimes we struggle as well. And second, because times are different. We have many more demands right now, I mean economical demands, and it's very hard to follow, but we try to do our best always, and always we can, right? We try to get as close as possible from these words as we can. So here I brought a few examples of how good he was and how he treated his patients. So one night, it was late at night, his own daughter was with a very high fever, and his wife was very worried. And suddenly somebody knocked at the door, and it was a lady asking him to go to her house to see her son, because her son had a very high fever as well. And he hesitated at the door. And then he looked at her wife, and her wife asked him not to go because their own son was very sick and needed his attention. And then he looked at the lady and he looked at his wife, and then he connected himself in thought, in his mind with God. And he asked Jesus to protect his son. And then he said to his wife, our son will stay with the best doctor, which is Jesus. He is in his hands. I'm going with this lady because her son needs my attention, needs my care, and needs my knowledge. And then he left his house and he took care of the child of that lady. And when he returned home by dawn, already in the morning, he was afraid his son was already dead. And then when he got home, he just realized that the fever of his son was already gone and he was very, very well. So he had that help from good spirits in order to help other people. And on other occasion, he was walking on the street, and this man came to him and asked, Dr. Bezerra, I am hungry. I don't have money to eat. I don't have a job, and my son is very, very sick. You should help me, please. And then he looked in his pockets, and he had no money at all. He had nothing on him. And then again, he thought in Our Lady, Jesus' mother. And then an idea came to his mind. So he just hugged the man. He hugged the man very strong. And then he said to the man, do you believe in Our Lady, in Mary, Christ's mother? And then the man said, yes, I believe in her. And then he said, so this hug was her hug. When you get home, you just hug your son. And it's going to be like Our Lady hugging your son. And he will be good. And then he didn't have any news from that man again until the next week. And that man came running and smiling and saying that he did exactly as he was supposed to do. He hugged his son, and his son was already good, and he had found a job so he could work to bring money home and bring food home. And he was very thankful to Dr. Bezerra and to Our Lady. Another day, himself had nothing to eat at home. He and his wife had nothing to eat at home. And when he left to see his patients for free, he told his wife he would find a way to find food. And he came back home late at night, hungry, because he did not find food at all, and very worried with his family that had not who did not have food to eat. And when he got home, his wife was very happy and told him that he overreacted, that he did not need to bring a whole truck of food, because somebody just parked a whole truck of food in front of his house and gave all that food to his family, and he didn't know who that person was. So he told her that he prayed to God that somebody could bring food to his family, and that just happened. So that's a very curious and interesting episode in his life as well. And there is this famous story about his graduation ring. There is a picture of him wearing that graduation ring, which was made by emerald, a green stone, very valuable stone. And somebody knocked at his door, and it was a lady. The lady brought her son with fever and very sick, and he made a prescription, but she did not have money to buy the medication. So he just took off his ring, told her to sell the ring and buy the medication. So that's the man. That's Dr. Bezerra De Menezes in his mission. He was not attached to matter at all. He was a man of Christ, a man on a mission to help and to be an example of charity and love. So a very interesting point. Why is he so important for Spiritism? In 1884, FAB was found, right? The Brazilian Spiritist Federation was found in 1884. So even though he knew his friends who were participating in FAB as directors, president, vice president, he was not part. He helped a lot, but he was not part of the directors at that moment. But in 1889, he became president. And at that point, he was the engine behind the Spiritist movement, exactly like Ismael had asked him. Spiritism was facing a very difficult time in Brazil, a very strong opposition, and people were trying to make Spiritism sounds silly and sounds not true, and sounds like something from devil. And Fabi needed somebody strong, somebody with moral values, somebody that could guide from example, from his own actions. So in 1889, he became a president. With great cultural background, with his experience as a politician, and his great heart, fulfilled by the love for everyone, he was the captain of the boat named Spiritism, through waters of arrogant scientificism and superficial illuminism, which were threats to the solid principles of Kardec's ideas or to Spiritism itself. So he was the connection between Ismael and the true. He was the connection between the spiritual world and science because he was a doctor. He was the connection between the spiritual world and charity because he led by example. And he was the right man on the right place on the right time because everybody respected him a lot. So he was president for only 1 year, 1889. And then again, facing difficult times, they called him back. They asked him to become president again, and so he came back to be president of FAB in 1895. And then he was president until 1900 when he deincarnated, when he passed away. So at that time, the time of discord and radicalizations in the spirit milieu, in the spirit movement, was rising very much. So they needed somebody to unite everyone. And that's from where comes his very famous sentence, his very famous words. Supportive, we will be union. Separated from each other, we will be points of view. Together, we will achieve the realization of our purposes. So he was the one who united the Spiritist milieu, the Spiritist movement in Brazil, opening some room for the gospel of Christ to spread through the country, and with the idea brought from Ismael to make this country heart of the world, home or land of the gospel. Without him, that would not be possible. That would not have been possible, and we would have lost a lot. So that was very, very important, maybe the most important mission of his life. One day, he was asked what made him happy after he passed away. What was the happiest news or the happiest facts that happened after he passed away? And if I'm not mistaken, this information was brought by us from Divaldo Pereira Franco, the great medium in Brazil. And he told that after he was deincarnated, the few hours or the few days after he passed away, he got a visit from Selina, which is a spirit very fond and very close to Mary, Our Lady. And then Selina told him that he was very welcome in the spirit world, that he had won his mission, he had accomplished his mission, he was very successful. But as they were talking, they became to hear and to listen a lot of voices outside. And he asked Selina what were those voices. And then she invited him to see from himself. So he got up, he opened a window, and he could see thousands of people outside that window. And he asked Selina, but I don't know these people. Who are these people? And then she answered, they are the ones that you consoled, without even asking their name. They are those tormented spirits who arrived at mediumship sessions. In your word fell on them like a balm on a raw wound. They are the forgotten of earth, the broken of the world, whom you have encouraged and guided. They are the ones who greet you on the gates of eternity. So, according to him, this was the happiest moment of his life after he passed away as Dr. Bezerra de Menezes. The happiest moment in the spiritual world that he has ever experienced, because that moment he realized that he had accomplished his mission, the mission that Ismael and Jesus had asked him. And after that, Selina came back other time to talk to him, representing Our Lady. And in one of those visits, around 1950 of our era, there was a meeting on the spiritual world to celebrate 50 years of his passing. Chico Xavier was there during his sleep, and he told us this story. And a very bright star came from above, and it was Selina. And Selina reads a letter from Our Lady inviting him to work at the higher world. He had conquered the right to be an inhabitant of a higher world. And after reading that, after listening to Selina reading that letter, he was very happy, and tears came to his eyes, and a lot of emotions in his heart, but he refused the invitation, and he asks authorization or permission to stay in his humble position, helping people from earth. And that per se shows how great of a man he is, how great of a heart he has. And he stayed with us until now. We can see messages from him all around Brazil and all around the world. He is always present. We have messages from him brought through Chico Xavier. For example, we have the book Workers of Eternal Life. By the end of the book, we see the spirit of André Luiz, the author of the book, meeting him in an institution of charity in Rio de Janeiro, where he is helping orphans, and a lady that that used to take care of those orphans. We see him writing messages and stories through Ivone do Amaral Pereira, a great medium in Brazil. For example, in the book Dramas da Obsessão, or Dramas of Obsession, the first story called Leonel and the Jews. It's a very, very beautiful story, and it's Dr. Bezerra who takes initiative to help Leonel in that story, and he has a team with him. And in that book, we get to know Roberto, which is a doctor who works with him, and we get to find out that Roberto is actually Roberto de Canalejas, which is a doctor who we can see and know in the great book Memories of a Suicide by Ivone do Amaral Pereira. It's the same Roberto that works with him. And we have messages from him by Divaldo Pereira Franco, and books from him, and he's one of the main characters of the famous book Madness and Obsession, or Craziness and Obsession. I don't know the exactly translation in English, but it's a book that Divaldo wrote through Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, and Dr. Bezerra is a main character in that book. He's an instructor of Manuel Filomeno de Miranda in that book. So he is always present, helping people and helping the Spiritist movement, and that's why he's so important. So his life was very rich, a very rich life with many teachings. I highly recommend a new book written by Mr. Klein from Ceará, Brazil, by Luciano Klein, which is a very big book about a very big biography on Dr. Bezerra de Menezes. I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure there is no translation to English so far, but those who can read Portuguese should buy this book and read about his life. It's like more than 1,000 pages. It took Mr. Luciano Klein more than 10 years of research to write this book. So it's a very, it's pure gold. It's worth reading. So I highly recommend, because there you're going to find many more information on him and many more stories to show how great he is. So I thank very much the United States Spiritist Federation for this invitation. I ask Dr. Bezerra to bless us, and Jesus and Ismael to bless us and to bless the work of the United States Spiritist Federation to spread this beautiful message of Spiritism. I hope my English was good enough, and I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Vicente. Yeah, your English was perfect, sir. Thank you very much. We have some interesting comments and questions here. So let's start with the Yasko. Yasko has a comment here. Hi, Vicente. Very interesting notations about Bezerra de Menezes' conversion from skepticism to be a true Spiritist and the most prominent contributor to the Spiritist movement in Brazil. So, if I may, I am curious into how you, Dr. Vicente Pessoa, got to Spiritism after your phase of skepticism on spiritual power in medicine.
Okay, thank you for the question, Yasko. It's a personal question. The fact is, and the truth is that I am a Spiritist from birth. My mother was a Spiritist already, and my grandmother was Spiritist already. My grandmother was born in 1918 in the city of Sacramento, Minas Gerais. And there is a very curious story with my grandmother and Euripides Barçanufo, the great spirit man that lived there, a follower of Christ. And my grandmother was born with his help on one of those phenomenons that he was known to be in two places at the same time. So one of them was with my grandmother. And so my family became, my family on the side of my mother became Spiritist because of that. And my mother brought Spiritism to myself when I was a child, and my grandmother as well. They used to read books for me, like Nosso and the Gospel, the Spirit's book. So it all came very naturally to me. I didn't have any questions and any doubt at all. But when we get to medical school, you go very deep on matter. You study physiology and things like in detail. And we are weak, right? We are human beings, and sometimes we deviate from the right path. And for a few years, I believe, like for 2 or 3 years after medical school, when I was in residency and specialization in infectious disease, I got away a little bit from Spiritism, and I had some questions. But after that, something began to grow on me, like some responsibilities, some feelings. I had to do something, I had to work, I had to study Spiritism again, and it was like suffocating me. So I had no choice. I had to go back, and I do not regret at all. After a few years, after that happened, I just came to the conclusion that I am absolutely on the right path, and I am absolutely convinced about things, and I have no questions at all anymore. So I'm very thankful to my grandmother and very thankful to my mother. Both of them are passed away already. They are already in the spirit world. And I am sure, as Ismael helped Dr. Bezerra, they helped me a lot. So that's the story. We are very influenced by colleagues as well, by teachers and instructors in medical school. So sometimes you get kind of inhibited, right? Is that right? The word inhibited?
Influenced, inhibited.
Yeah. Sometimes that happened, but it was momentary. It was like during 2 or 3 years, and I came back to the right path, I think.
Thank you for sharing that coming of age story with us. That was quite interesting.
Yeah, my grandmother's story is very interesting. It's written in a book, actually, this
Really?
story. Yeah, from IDE. I don't know if you know IDE, Glaucio. It's Instituto de Difusão Espírita from Araras, São Paulo.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, yes.
Yeah, and they used to publish a book called Anuário Espírita, Spiritist Annuary, like the facts that have happened in the Spiritist movement in that year. So in 1992, the Anuário Espírita from 1992, the story of my grandmother is written in that book. I even have at my house, I will show you someday. How can I say mamadeira in English?
Bottle, nursing bottle.
Nursing bottle. I even have the nursing bottle that Euripides gave to my great grandfather in order to him to give to my grandmother. It's made by glass because they didn't have that plastic at that time. It's made by glass. It's in my possession, and I get very emotional when I get close to that nursing bottle made by glass because I know that Euripides touched that bottle.
Wow.
So it's very impressive, a very good energy. And then my mother gave it to me as a present. And Euripides chose my grandmother's name. It was on a stick on the bottom. So it's a very impressive story. One day I tell that story in more details for you.
Yeah, next time you come back, you can share.
Yeah.
There was a question from Daniel Santos. Thanks for the biographic presentation, Vicente. You, as a physician, could you share with us how much Dr. Bezerra has impacted you and how?
Well, that's a very important question, and I thank my friend Daniel for bringing that subject to us. It influences a lot. I always think of him every day before going to my medical practice. In my prayers, before seeing the patients, I try to think of him, to ask him for his protection and for his inspiration. And sometimes we feel his presence, and he has a very strong presence in the medical spiritist movement in Brazil. He is our patron, our patron. Yeah, our patron. And he also brought to us, by psychography, the 10 commandments of the Spiritist doctor. So this is written and published. The medium was Dr. Marlene Rossi Severino Nobre, which was the founder of the medical spiritism movement, and was also friends with Chico Xavier. And she was wife of Freitas Nobre, a great spiritist in Brazil, a great journalist. And she brought by psychography those 10 commandments of the spiritist doctor. So you can find that in Google if you Google it, like the 10 commandments of the spiritist doctor. And one of them that calls my attention is like, you have to be faithful to Kardec's idea, and you have to work at a spirit center. You have to contribute working at a spirit center. So those commandments, they call my attention because sometimes we get too scientific and we forget to follow Kardec and to follow the gospel. And I really like that Dr. Bezerra brought that idea to us. on those 10 commandments, because they are very important. I think Kardec is very important, and Kardec is a revolution, like Jesus was a revolution, and Kardec just complements that revolution. And that's why I think it's very important. And that's the way I think Dr. Bezerra influences everybody, right? With inspiration. And you have to search for him, right? You have to pray for him. Well, of course, you have to open the doors to get influence. But I think of him a lot, and sometimes I think what he would do in my place. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the whole idea of staying true to one's values, right? Regardless of one's profession. So next question here from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. Many Spiritist centers in Brazil receive messages from Dr. Bezerra De Menezes. Besides him being present in many psychographic books by Divaldo Franco. Now here's the question, interesting question. How can a spirit be present in so many different places at the same time? That's quite an interesting question.
Yeah, and the question is right. We cannot count how many spirit centers in Brazil are called Centro Espírita or Spirit Center Bezerra de Menezes in honor of him. Many libraries are named after him. Library Bezerra de Menezes. Many conferences places like gymnasiums and auditoriums are named Bezerra de Menezes. He's everywhere because he's very important. And it's not rare that, for example, every Wednesday in Brazil, there should be thousands of spirit center getting a message from Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, signed by him. A lot of mediums in all Brazilian cities are getting messages from him.
Do you mind if I interject something? All over the world.
All over the world, yeah, you're right. So how can that be possible, right? So there are a few explanations, and all of them are reasonable. For example, when you study the Spirits book, we have an information from the spirits there that the greater the spirit is, the more light the spirit has, more evolution that spirit has, he can reach higher, he can see longer, further. It's like, and Kardec brings a very interesting comparison. It's like I'm watching the horizon, I don't see very far. But if I go up in a mountain, then I can see very, very far. So Kardec brings this comparison, right? Those kind of spirits with a lot of light, a lot of power, a lot of evolution, like Jesus, they can see and irradiate their thoughts everywhere. They have that ability to do that. That's an explanation. That's one way. Another way involves the one thing that I mentioned in my talk, which was his assistance, right? Of course, Dr. Bezerra has a team. I mentioned Roberto de Canalejas, which is a spirit that can perfectly answer a question, signing Dr. Bezerra for him. He has his trust, and many others. So this is another explanation and another possibility that many people, many spirits, friends with Dr. Bezerra, and with the same level of education, evolution, and knowledge and kindness, can answer a message signing Dr. Bezerra because he trusts them with the palm of his hand, right? So that's another explanation. And of course, I believe that the spiritual world have their methods, have their methods that we don't even know about. So we have technology that we don't even know about. He may radiate his thoughts about electronic devices. We think it's electronic, right? But plasma devices, we don't know exactly what they use there. We have some notions about as we read some books, like André Luiz books. But those are the most common explanations, right? His thoughts that are irradiated because he can reach very far, very far away, because he is Dr. Bezerra, like Jesus can do, and evolved spirit can do. Some assistants that can go directly to the place and answer the questions in his behalf, right? And those devices. So those are the three explanations that come to my mind right now. I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but I believe that covers pretty much everything.
Thank you. That was a very good explanation. Thank you very much. Now we have the last question. You mentioned that Dr. Bezerra de Menezes was both a man of science and a spiritual individual. Therefore, is it possible for someone who has a scientific mind to also be connected to God?
It's not only possible, but it's necessary, right? It's a necessity. Sometimes when we dive deep in science, we get lost. And there is a very famous sentence by Albert Einstein and by the great uh, French astronomer Camille Flammarion, who I believe I also had the opportunity to talk about here for the United States Spirit Federation. I'm trying to find that sentence here in a few minutes. I just found it because I don't know if you know, but I have an Instagram account and YouTube channel where I talk about Camille Flammarion.
Nice.
And I brought this. I'm just here with the picture of Flammarion and Einstein to show you. And the sentence that Einstein said was that this is in Portuguese, but I will try to translate. I will say in Portuguese and then translate, right? So, toda a nossa ciência, comparada com a realidade, é primitiva e infantil. E, no entanto, é a coisa mais preciosa que temos. So, all our science, compared to reality, is primitive and childish. However, it's the most precious thing we have. And Camille Flammarion said something very, very similar that I bring in this post. And he says that even though we rarely make science justice, the truth is that science changed the world. On her are based our present time, the base of our intellectual life and our material life. Only science can enlighten us and conduct us. So those are two phrases, two sentences from two scientists that highlight how important science is. But even Einstein, and especially Camille Flammarion, they constantly in their works realized that without the religious sentiment, the religious feeling, science would lead us to a very dangerous way. So they believed, and Newton also believed that, Galileo also believed that, Kepler also believed that, that science and religion are not antagonic. They work together to bring us peace, happiness, and both have their role in the world right now. And unfortunately, some people just go through science very deep and forget about kindness and love, and the real purpose of science, which is help, right? I was just talking about that in a Spiritist Congress about the transitions, the time of transition we are facing, right? So we are facing very good conquerors in science, like DNA, gene mutations, space travel. So we have a lot of conquerors, right, in science, but we have to impregnate that with love. You can use everything I said for bad, like you can use genetics for bad, you can use space travel for bad, but the time is to bring to science kindness and good, and that's what we need. Men like Bezerra de Menezes knew exactly how to do that, and that's the importance of him.
Nice, very interesting. I like that you did mention like three great geniuses, right? Isaac Newton, um, and Einstein and Galileo Galilei. I mean, they're all very religious people, but also very scientific. That is very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you very much, Vicente. That was a very interesting lecture. I would like to just before we move on to the closing, to your closing remarks, I would just like to remind our audience again about the Spiritist Symposium. Yeah, so again, the 17th Spiritist Symposium will happen on September 30th, 2023 in Portland, Oregon. It will focus on spiritual path to mental balance. For registration, go to spiritistsymposium.org. So there you have it. Save the date. Vicente, if it's okay with you, could you please, if you're willing to, provide any final comments that you have, any final remarks? Also, if you want to talk to us about any projects that you have, you did mention the Instagram and YouTube channels that you have. Feel free to talk about those. And if it's also okay with you, would you mind saying the final prayer for us?
Okay, Glaucio, first of all, I want to thank you and João and Danielle, who are in the backstage, right, for the help, and everybody from the United States and for all around the world that will watch this talk later on. And that's it. I just want to thank. And I have this channel, if you feel free to visit, about Camille Flammarion. It's an astronomer from France. He was friends with Kardec, and he wrote many books that many spiritists don't know. So feel free to visit. It's called Nekafi. Uh, uh, I will just type it here, right? Nekafi. Uh, so I tried to promote his works and his life as a scientist, as an astronomer, and as a spiritist. And that's it. So we came to an end. I thank you very much, and I will do the pray.
Yeah.
So
One more thing, if you don't mind. Also, we're gonna continue our talks next week. We're gonna have another interesting talk as well called "Demystifying Death" with Rajani Planner. So another very interesting talk. So everybody's invited also to watch it in our YouTube and Facebook channel.
okay. So are you ready to the pray? Right?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay. So I will ask everyone to connect to Jesus in your thoughts, trying to imagine him embracing us with his light, with his smile, with his kind eyes, his kind look, and also with him, Dr. Bezerra De Menezes, with his light eyes, his sweet look, his kindness, and his love. And thank them for the support, for the inspiration, and ask them to give us the strength and the courage to follow their path, to follow their way, and to follow their teachings. May them take care of the United States Spirit Federation, helping them to bring light to the United States and to the world, and helping them to comfort many hearts who are suffering and who don't have access to this knowledge and to this information. So may Jesus and Dr. Bezerra be with us, guiding and inspiring us always. So be it.